So, as we were saying, we were just doing a little bit of a light introduction, how are yous, those kind of things. And I know you guys had an event at the shop yesterday. Talk to me a little bit
Yeah.
about that. How were things? Because I was there when I was there very early because I went to Michael Jackson the musical actually. But I
Yes.
saw on Instagram stories that things looked fun. Looks like it was jumping in there. Before we get into today's episode, I want to remind you if you like the episode, give it a like, and if you really like it, subscribe. Let's dive in.
It was definitely extremely poppin'. It was a really great turnout, really great vibe. Like really felt the love and the energy from everyone that showed up. Uh it felt really community driven too,
Yeah.
because Trey, who was doing the DJing for us, works a couple doors down at 242. Um, he hooked us up with the beverage sponsor, Dirty Water Seltzer. So it just felt, it was just, I don't know, it was a really heartwarming, beautiful moment for me because it was so community driven, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. It feels like that whole street, Mulberry Street. I don't know how many other stores or people who are on that street that you communicate with, but I know Blackstock and Weber and Trey and Chris and everyone there, like
Yeah.
it seems like you guys have a very good relationship with them and their staff. And like just that whole street. It just feels like a good time. It feels like a good time.
It's definitely a good place to be from a retail perspective, for sure. There's so many other places staffed with really great people, really smart people, really knowledgeable people.
Yeah.
And from the top down, honestly, it starts with my bosses, Neil and Jeremy. Being good neighbors and being community driven is super important to them. They were that way at the first store, same thing in our Santa Fe store. And so it's the same thing here in New York.
I love it.
It's definitely very important for us to not only be good neighbors, but also like try to actively help people, other people in the community, other stores in the community,
Yeah.
help them grow.
Totally. It's kind of reminding me of this idea. I don't know how much time you spend on social media, Kyle, but there's this kind of new idea going around called third place. Have you heard about this?
I have not, no.
So there's this kind of, and I don't know who started it. I don't know the full lineage of everything, but there's this idea that a lot of the reason why Gen Z and this current generation of people and social media generation are more lonely than ever before is because they don't have a third place. And traditionally, a third place in America looked like going to your local YMCA every week, or
Mm,
going to church, or going to a local knitting group, something where it's beyond school and work or like work and home. You know what I mean? A third place. And
yeah.
I've been exploring this idea in my mind. I've never really said it out loud, but I feel like brands like Standard and Strange, like yourself, what you and your teammates do, like you create a third place for people within the interest that they already have. And I think it's actually really cool. I don't know if you've ever like thought about like obviously you're very community driven, which is important. I think as a brand, like you want to be community driven. You want to have people who not only like the clothes, but like being around the stories and the people who represent the clothes. But I don't know if there's any thoughts about that. Like, have you ever heard? You've never heard about third place, but like, is it something obviously like Standard and Strange is trying to push, which is having that community aspect as a part of the retail aspect of the
Yes,
brand? Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, it's extremely important to me that when people come in, they feel like a level of warmth and a level of community. And that Standard and Strange is a place that you can come and hang out and experience not only great clothes, but like great service and great people and like have interesting, thoughtful conversations with people. It's not, I don't want what we do here to be hyper transactional in a
Yeah.
sense. I mean, at the end of the day, we're a business, obviously, but I want people to have a real feeling of like this is a place you can come and hang out and just chill, and there's like zero pressure. Like I'm just here, like I love meeting people, I love talking to people, I love exposing people to these garments, and that's kind of like how I try to approach my day to day in the shop.
Totally. That's what you did for me. I mean,
Ah,
let's
thanks, man, I
I mean,
appreciate that.
I guys, so we're gonna actually do a little proper, not like a very traditionally proper intro, but I kind of want to set the stage a little bit. So why are we doing this episode? For me, Standard and Strange is one of those brands that when I moved to New York City, it was definitely a brand on my or a multi-brand retailer on my radar, right? and I'd been recommended the shop over and over and over again. Finally took the time to come into the shop, and I remember meeting Sam, I remember meeting Kyle, and Kyle in particular was someone who just struck me as, for one, like this incredibly devilishly stylish individual, like very, very
Thank you.
stylish. Every time I walk into the shop, you and Sam and everyone who's in there, I'm like, damn, I need to step up my style. Like these dudes, they got something going on here. And obviously we'll get into that a little bit as well. But for you in particular, Kyle, I was really struck just by your breadth of knowledge of the product that was there. Also, I was just struck by, it just seemed like you really cared. Like it seemed like you really cared. It seemed like you really like loved being here, and we'll kind of get into that as well. But I think like for someone who doesn't know you, for someone who doesn't know Standard and Strange, can we kind of just like set the stage a little bit for like what this conversation, why this conversation is existing?
Absolutely.
Like just give me a bit of like who you are and what is Standard and Strange, and then we'll kind of peel back the layers on you yourself and get into
Yeah,
everything.
totally. So my name is Kyle Foxworth. I'm the manager and buyer at Standard and Strange New York City. Standard and Strange is a multi-brand boutique specializing in rare brands, making some of the best clothing from around the world. Broadly speaking, our concept is own fewer, better things.
I love that.
Um, so everything that we have is really thoughtfully produced, first from a design perspective and then from a production perspective. We have brands that are doing pretty direct reproductions of like classic American sportswear, military wear, and workwear. And then we have some other brands that take a little bit more of like an avant-garde or modern approach to their design process. And from a footwear perspective, I think that we have the widest and best assortment of casual boots in the city. So yeah, I think that's also a
Mic
very
drop.
mic drop. Boom. That is us. That is us in a nutshell.
I love it.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, and I think even for me, I would say, that's a very accurate representation of Standard and Strange. The cool thing, and I don't necessarily want to do this, but in my head, as someone who's learning about the brand and someone who knows my audience, like when I walk into Standard and Strange, it kind of feels like for me, I grew up in Colorado. We have a multi-brand retailer in Colorado called Canoe Club.
for sure.
And
Yeah,
Canoe Club
absolutely.
does things it's very different, but it's similar in some ways too. And I feel like for kind of New York City, Manhattan in the city, Soho, Nolita in the city, like it feels like you guys operate in a space where you just remind me of Canoe Club. So if my audience is like, okay, like I'm trying to still get a gauge, obviously you can look at the Instagram, you can look at the content, you look at the clothes, and you can kind of get a visual aspect of it. But like when I step in the Standard and Strange, I feel like just another version of a very well done, very thoughtful, very concentrated effort of people who really
Mhm.
care about specific clothing that's made well, that has a lot of details in it, and people who are just genuine, right?
Yeah,
It's not like a massive capital F big fashion store. It's something
yeah,
that it's where people come to buy clothes made by real people telling real
yeah,
stories, right?
yeah,
So, all right, cool. Let's take a deep breath. That's I know it's as a representation of a manager, as a representation of Standard and Strange, it's not always easy to talk on behalf of an organization like that. So you're doing
sure.
a fantastic job.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
These next questions are all going to be about you, man. Because I actually like the way I do the podcast. I want to learn about individuals, and then obviously as I learn about you, you reveal to me the inner workings of organizations and things of that nature, right? So I think it's going to be powerful in that way. So
Yeah,
let's go to the beginning of your journey in fashion and style and creativity. And before your manager and head buyer, Standard and Strange, long, long ago, where are you from,
long
Kyle?
time
Yeah, where are you from? And tell me a little bit about what it was like for you growing up.
for sure. I was born in Queens, but I was raised out in a small town in South Shore, Long Island called Massac Shirley.
Mm,
It's about, for frame of reference, if you're going out east, the Hamptons is about another 30 minutes further east.
gotcha.
Um, my parents were of a generation where their whole goal in life was to not like raise their kids in the inner city.
Mm,
So after I was born, they moved me and my brother out to Long Island. Again, Massac Shirley. But the way we grew up was very much similar to people who grew up in the five boroughs. Like grew up with the same cultural references, but we
mm.
just like lived around a beach and drove cars instead of you know, seeing tall concrete buildings our entire lives. So we definitely had the same, like we wore pink because of Cameron. We started wearing button-down shirts because Jay-Z told us to wear button-down shirts. Very sort of classic
Yeah.
New York City, late 90s, early 2000s references uh, from a from just like a artistic cultural perspective. I would say in high school is when I sort of started to find my own perspective in not just clothing, but in my worldview. Um,
Yeah.
but particularly when it comes to fashion, like I started wearing skinny jeans in '06, which was like kind of wild and slightly revolutionary in my small Long Island hometown. Especially because I was wearing it with brands like a Bathing Ape. That was like prime babe time.
Yep.
Um, yeah, and I was very much a more. I didn't have a particular social group that I hung out with. Like I had friends that were jocks, I had friends that were skaters, I had kids that like friends that were like, were like hip hop heads.
Mm.
My friends sort of spanned the gamut, but I was very different in my approach when I got towards like in like the formative years of my childhood.
Yeah. Yeah. And talk to me about that difference. Are you saying different in your approach towards social life, different in your approach towards what you found interesting and how you absorb culture and then
Yep.
displayed that culture? Or like what are we talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think different in every way. So like
Everywhere.
different in my appearance. So
Mhm.
I was very different in the way I dressed, and I like very different in my worldview, uh, or like artistically and politically. I think a lot of my hometown, it's like you could get very. It's the same thing in many small towns, I think, around the country.
Yeah.
So you can, there's a lot of people that get like really stagnated where they're from and stay in that little bubble their entire life. I became of age and basically my entire my entire goal was to get out of said bubble because I didn't necessarily like I didn't connect with it anymore. It was very important for me as a child to be like have or be around those specific cultural references that still stick with me to this day. I mean, I get my hair cut with a low fade and a crescent moon because of Raekwon and Nas. I wear a gold pinky ring. Like I hold to these cultural references still to this day, and I think they are definitely a part of my personal style now as an adult. But I think in high school, like so much of I wanted to just rebel against it so much. Like
Mm,
those cultural references. I wanted to get away. I didn't want to be pigeonholed. I wanted to get away from those things.
right. Right. And like when you look back on that period of time, in high school, middle school, those are like very coming of age moments.
For sure.
And it's interesting you say that because and the more I do, I'm kind of cutting myself off and going in different directions, but the more I do interviews and talk to people who grew up on the East Coast, the more I realize like the culture, the all of the movements and the energy on this side of the country is something that is so much more powerful than I realized when I was like middle school, high school, because I grew up in a
Yeah.
different part of the country and I had the same thing, but it was the references were just a little different. They're coming from like the more West Coast icons, right?
Yeah.
Like we obviously everyone like skateboarding, but like the like kind of like surfer skater vibe was more my thing. And then having like those kind of references. Also, like there was a moment where I myself wanted to kind of play with the things that were presented to me, but also didn't want to be pigeonholed, like you're saying, right? Like
Yeah.
being nailed down to one thing is weird, especially when you're uh a black kid who where
Mm,
the world wants to kind of paint you in a particular light, or your friends might want to paint you in a particular light, or what you're seeing might be the only light that you see yourself in. But anyways, the reason why I stopped you and wanted to ask is because like would you look back on those formative years as a kid who was rebelling and who was going through all of these different feelings of like I just want to exert my difference on the world. Did you necessarily know that you also wanted to do that from a standpoint of like what you wore? And if you did, and maybe you've already answered this a little bit, but like if you did, like what were some of the things that you were wearing in addition to like skinny jeans with Bape, or like how are you getting access to these things? Like give me the lore around how you were able to do all of this at that period in time.
So yeah, it was definitely a conscious effort to be different physically, like wear different clothing and look different from
Yeah.
a physical perspective. I had a lip piercing too, which I still got a hole in my face because of, uh,
Wow.
which is hysterical. But I have an older brother who's 3 years older, and when he left high school, he moved out and lived with my grandmother in Jamaica, Queens, and was in the city
Mm,
constantly. Um, so when I was like 16, 17, 18, I was spending a lot of time in the city. I was like basically going out for 2 weekends a month out in the city for like those 3 years. He was working at a store called Coat of Arms in the Lower East Side on Clinton Street.
yep.
And at the time, the man running the store was Brian Procell. He was the buyer and the manager of the store. And he now runs famed Procell Vintage on Delancey Street now.
Mm,
He was sort of a big figure in the sort of the boom and the resurgence of like 90s vintage in New York City, and was bringing that stuff to Coat of Arms in 2006, 2007, 2008, like vintage starter, vintage champion, vintage like Helly Hansen, stuff like that. He was really responsible in many ways for making that stuff popular. Really had his finger on the pulse when it comes to that stuff.
yeah.
um and I got to like meet people like the Cool Kid, the rap group the Cool Kids. Like they came and they did a shoot there, bunch of people. So I really got exposed to a lot of like really interesting city stuff, like just going out and hanging out with him. Like we were doing graph at the time, so just hanging out, meeting graph writers. Um, it was really just like getting out of my small hometown
Yeah.
and just experiencing new things. Because I was just like I would get off the Long Island Railroad and it's just like eye candy everywhere. It's like really, and you just get. I just wanted to like soak it all up. I wanted to like really, really try to retain all of this information,
Yeah.
and I think that's really what sort of sparked the interest. And then I would go back home and then people would like look at me funny because of like the way I was dressing and like and I was like, you don't even understand like the levels of what I'm doing here. It's like it was, yeah, and that's not even to like pat myself on the back because there were other people doing that. Like I wasn't all that unique. I was maybe unique in my small town,
Right.
but I wasn't all that, there were people all over the city that were into the same things and doing the same things.
No, but I think there is and I think I just got it now. There is a difference between like being in a place like New York City is there are only few other city equivalents that
Yeah,
have such a display of prowess when it comes to culture. And
yeah,
like I'm learning and realizing that, but like when you come to New York or when you're in New York City, like what you see, there's of course going to be other people doing similar and showing different displays of creativity with their outfits, their styling, the way that they show it, their photography, all the things,
yeah,
right? Um, but like unless you're in London, unless you're in Milan, unless you're in Tokyo, unless you're in Paris, like there's not any other place that has that same culture going on. And so
yeah,
like it when you bring something like a Milan, a Paris, a New York City to a small town or
yeah,
to a middle of the country kind of city, everyone will look at you like you're outside of your mind. But when you're in New York City, sometimes what you're doing is middle of the road. It's not even
yeah.
really it's
You're
not even
average.
yeah, exactly. And so like that is the vortex that is New York City, that is Paris, that is London, that is Milan, where you have such a just a distinct and high level of creativity and style going on, right? And
Yeah.
like I want to ask you too before we kind of move on. So you grew up around this. Obviously, like you grew up in relatively close proximity. You were able to take the train in and experience these kind of things. Did you ever, when you were a kid, travel to other places in the US? Whether it was, on the Eastern Corridor or West or even outside of the country?
Yeah, really, as a kid, I really only ever went to Virginia. So my mom's from Virginia. My dad's from New York. He was born in Bed-Stuy. My mom was born in a small little country town called Alberta in Virginia.
Wow.
So we would go to Virginia pretty regularly over the summer, like as a youth. Um, that's really about it, honestly. We didn't really have much money to travel, to be completely honest. Like we were
Yeah.
pretty you know, my parents did a very good job raising me and my brother in many ways, but we didn't have a lot. So it was sometimes hard for us to get out. But we would go to Virginia, and then my half sister Sonia lives in Florida. We would in Jacksonville. We would
Mm.
also go visit her. So I would say like those two places.
Got it. Got it. Very, very interesting. Cool. Now, okay, let's let's kind of talk about these moments after high school, right? Because
Yeah,
there's I think I'm starting to get it, right? Your parents, you moved in once you were born, you moved and you lived outside of the city, right? In this kind of, I can't remember the exact name, but a little bit away from the Hamptons. You're kind of Long Island and you're doing
yeah,
that thing. You had a brother who obviously like kept you connected and tapped in at different times. And as you got older, you knew what was going on in the city because there was a lot of things going on in the 90s and 2000s that
yeah.
would make themselves known to you, right? You're in high school. You graduate high school, I assume. What's after you graduate high school and kind of give us the journey of, you know, Kyle Foxworth from high school to a little bit more into how you got into professional fashion.
Mm. So after high school, I also left my small town and I went to go live with my grandmother in Jamaica, Queens with my brother. And I
Mm.
started working like part-time for like next to nothing at Coat of Arms with my brother and my friend at the time, Falcon, that they were really working at the store. Um, so I almost immediately got out. Like I moved out. I
Wait, wait,
graduated
wait.
in,
One thing, Kyle.
sorry.
Your friend, his name is Falcon.
Yes, that's his birth name. He would always have to show people his ID because nobody believed that his name was Falcon, but his birth name
Fox
was
and Falcon.
his mother named him Falcon.
That's
Um,
crazy.
and then yeah, it was literally every single time he's like, yeah, no, that's like it's not like a yeah, it's not a gimmick or like a made up thing. It's my actual birth name, and he would show people his ID or his
Kind of
driver's
cool.
license, and yeah, Falcon it was.
So as you were
Um,
saying, you moved and you were working with Falcon and your brother and go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, no, totally. So I did that for a few years. I mean, honestly, it's like we were like flat broke and like nothing go like we were just running around eating pizza, like a slice of pizza and trying to like live on that, like not dressing appropriately for the winter time. Like I'm just like freezing with a pair of Vans with holes in it, with a members only jacket and a hoodie, trying to live in the New York City winter. But those were like the most formative, really, of my life. Probably, I learned so much about myself as a human being during those times. It's like again, it's amazing how much you can like learn about yourself and build a perspective and a worldview when
Yeah.
you have absolutely nothing. It can really shape your thought processes. Um, so we did that for a few years. I moved back to Long Island for a couple of years, and then got back to the city in 2014 and started working at various men's shops with J. Crew in the city in 2014, particularly the liquor store and the Ludlow shop. RIP to both of those. Uh,
Mm.
yeah, those were the good times. And I'm also realizing how old I am. 20, yeah. God. Um, so I started working at J. Crew, and that really is what sort of started to like get me on the slippery slope to like the kind of clothes that I'm interested in now. I got exposed to like magazines like Free and Easy, RIP again, Clutch Magazine, Popeye, Second, magazine, stuff like that. And that's when I really started to get into like classic American heritage clothing. I learned about brands like the Real McCoys and
Mm.
the Osaka Five. Nigel Caborn, learned about people like John Gluckow, like, and I just kind of became really fascinated by these people and these brands and the people like making like reproductions either directly or in a more interpretive way of like classic and heritage clothing.
Yeah.
Um, like learning about leather jackets and selvage denim and like all of these things immediately became aspirational for me. And I think that's kind of why I became obsessed with them. Like I just like wanted, like it was so foreign and far away. Like again, growing up with the cultural references that I grew up with, and then being exposed to like streetwear and stuff in like my late teens, early 20s. Like this was a completely like new thing to me.
Yeah.
Like the idea of classic American heritage clothing. And I kind of just fell in love with it. Like the nature of like buying something that you will have forever and will patina and like age gracefully with you.
Mm,
I just like really fell in love with the stuff, and yeah, it's been downhill ever since.
totally.
Um, so that's why in the moment now, like in my moment now, in my position I have now, it's always very important for me to remain like realize that I am privileged and remain humble. I worked very hard to get to the position that I'm in, but also the stars kind of did align. And it's very important for me that like always remember that's like I think that's also too why I have such a reverence. It's like all of these clothes were like things that were so foreign to me, and
Hmm.
I became obsessed with it. And now I have so much access to it.
Yeah.
So it's very important for me to stay humble and and remind myself that I am in fact very privileged to be doing what I'm doing.
Totally. And I think I love the fact that you said that because, when I talk about selvage denim or when I talk about a particular leather jacket or something like that, like, and the price tag is what it is, and put it on, make it a video and smack it on TikTok, and 80% of the comments are, what's the $20 Amazon dupe, right? There
Yeah.
is a bit of frustration with that, but there's also a realization and a realness to that where, you know, being able to spend hundreds of dollars on garments is not something that is necessarily available for everyone. But what
Mm,
is available for everyone is the knowledge or the ability to acquire knowledge on why something like this is priced the way it is. Because I think
yes.
for me, the biggest reason why I love American heritage clothing or reproduction clothing, as you said, or Japanese Americana or Ivy style or whatever you want to call it, is because to me, from a standpoint of fashion history and literacy, it's rooted in something that is so much stronger and deeper than um fast fashion for sure, obviously, than luxury fashion in a lot of ways. Like it just
Mm,
never resonated with me, a lot of the luxury brands, because their price points are even higher, but it doesn't necessarily, there's no reason for it other than the fact that, there's a name attached to it. And maybe that's my ignorance to certain brands, certain things. Or like things are priced and are expensive because of a celebrity endorsement or because of a
yeah.
moment or because of this idea of hype. And I just don't think like American heritage or the style of clothing, the clothing that we're talking about that exists in Standard and Strange, it it isn't subservient to kind of the ebbs and flows of the trendy nature of fashion. And I think for me, and I don't know if this is the same for you too, but like that has always attracted me about this style. And
Mm,
the fact that you said it's aspirational and it's something that like once you kind of learn about it, it's hard to turn that switch off because you
yeah.
look at everything else with like such a microscope on, okay, you know, the real McCoy, they did it this way and they explain why. You're doing it in another way and you're not explaining why, but you're charging the same price. Is it
Yeah.
is it validated? Is it something
Yes.
that is like why should I believe that I should spend my money on this or consider
Yeah.
learning about what you're doing? Right? Um, and so, okay, so you're learning, you're going through the process of becoming more interested in these styles. You kind of mentioned some of the magazines and individuals. Was there any like one or like two bigger moments that stand out in the process of you kind of caring about this stuff that stands above the rest of the maybe moments in your life? Was there a particular magazine or was there a particular moment or a particular conversation or
Yeah.
anything like that that comes to mind for this journey.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say Clutch from a magazine perspective. I think Clutch was the number one because I they used to when I was at the liquor store, at the J. Crew liquor store, they would like send us copies. And like I would like wait with like bated breath when the mail showed up. Like, oh, the new Clutch showed up. Um and I would scroll through it and like it felt like there was a new brand in there every single time that I hadn't discovered, like I hadn't dug deep into.
Mm,
And I was just fascinated by it. And a lot of them had like zero web. So it's like you'd ever reference it again by going back to the magazine because they didn't have an Instagram and like they had no real like web presence.
yeah.
And it was just like it had a real lore to it. Like it had so much folklore. And yeah, it was just again like I was so far removed from it. Like it felt so foreign and impossible to attain that it just was like the sexiest thing in the world.
Yeah.
Um, so I'd say yeah, Clutch magazine was big, and then I think as a figure, I think Nigel Caborn was a big figure for me. He was like the first real designer from uh like a heritage clothing perspective that I really like started to fall in love with because he wasn't doing direct reproductions. He was like it was a lot more interpretive. There were
Yeah.
things that were like very there were things that were more direct, but he was like building collections around things and like had a real like design philosophy. Um, so I'd say yeah, like Caborn and Nigel Caborn was definitely a big thing for me.
Yeah, I talking about Nigel Caborn, the one of the first pieces that I was able to pick up at the shop were the British Army pants, the
Yes.
indigo ones
Yeah, yeah,
that he has.
yeah,
Absolutely beautiful.
yeah.
Absolutely beautiful pants.
I'm wearing them right now
You're
myself.
wearing them right now. Wow. What are
Yes.
the odds of that?
Yeah, I know. It's yeah, I honestly didn't even think of that until you just said that. That's hysterical. Yeah.
It's you're right. And the thing that's cool, we can talk about Nigel Caborn for a second, because I hadn't really known a lot about Nigel Claiborne in his it's an eponymous brand, yeah. His brand, like and being able to like experience the clothing firsthand, like I had never really seen a pair of and had a pair of like indigo selvage jeans like this and like the pocket
Yeah.
structures,
Yeah.
like the way everything's done is so tasteful. I know you can speak to it better than me because like this is like your bread and butter, but I don't know. I also am like the more I learn about Nigel, the cooler it is.
Yeah, I mean, he's
Um,
definitely a mythical figure in the space. I've not had the privilege of meeting him. I was in the same room with him twice during
mm,
Paris Market, and both times I like looked over and saw that he was walking somewhere, and I was like, I don't want to bother him. But yeah, he's definitely a very mythical figure. And those battle dress pants are absolutely gorgeous.
mm.
If you ever watch the film The Third Man, uh, one of the characters, Major Calloway, is wearing a pair of them. It's a film that's set in post-war Vienna about like it's a I don't it's a beautiful film. It's one of my favorite films ever.
Old
But
school
it's set in
film?
pro. Yeah, it came out in 50. Don't quote me.
I have it right here from 1949.
49. I was gonna say 52. I would have been wrong. And then Major Calloway he's a British military officer, and he's wearing a pair of battle dress pants
Mm,
in the film. A wool pair. He has a full suit actually.
amazing.
Um, so again, it's not like something like those battle dress pants. Doing it in a salvaged Japanese denim fabric is not a direct it's a design choice. It's an artistic choice.
Totally.
Uh, but yeah, it just seeing that reference and like have the fact that have a pair of pants on right now that is a reference of somebody who was wearing it in a film that came out in 1949 is just so cool to me and fascinating. It might not be cool to other people, but to me, it's just like the most fascinating thing of like making something old contemporary
Yeah.
or modern.
I think it's sick.
Yeah,
I think it's super sick because like I mean you said it yourself, like I the like clothing is a true is one of the true examples of like how art and history can be like it can have life breathed into it in such a unique and interesting way. Like you're wearing something from such a historical aspect, but like you said, there's a creative, fun, and like just different. I don't know where I'm trying to go with it, but
Yeah. No,
you
I
kind of
feel
get the
you.
point. It's
Yeah.
just fun. It's
Yeah.
just fun.
Not to go back, but real quick to your point of like talking about price, people talking about price point and stuff.
Oh, it's
I
great.
remember saying this to you when we first met. I think it's very important to me to like people know that like clothing is also on top of like the materials, the fabrics, the labor. Clothing is also an artistic endeavor, from its designing to patterning. And so much of that is like unquantifiable and hard to put a dollar amount to. And I think that like if you're using, to me, it's easy to contextualize really expensive clothing when you think of like, especially if it's made really, really well with really, really high quality materials and fabrics. And then also there's like a high level of design and artistic perspective behind it. Yeah, and I think that's something that like people don't necessarily, the average consumer might not necessarily understand, which is like it's fine. Like there's a lot of people, especially outside of the cities, right? The cult, like
Hmm.
outside of the coast, it's like, it's it's hard to fathom spending $3,000 on a leather jacket because it's like, I'm trying to feed my kids.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think there's like there's an important conversation there to be had.
Yeah. You're right. And I remember I was reading a book or listening to an audiobook. It's called Worn, and it kind of goes through this entire the entire story talks about how removed the average person is from understanding what it takes to make a garment, right? And
Yeah,
I think there has been a major shift in the culture. I'm not talking about like culture as in like street culture or hip hop or grunge, or I'm
sure.
talking about like macro society as a whole, where,
Yeah,
you know, in America in particular, like everyone is so removed from that uh the processes that are in place that make the food, that make the clothing, that because you are removed, because you don't necessarily know the amount of labor, the amount of hours, like there are still things, like I'll talk to people all the time about this. There are still like major elements in the production of a garment where people think, oh, it can just be done by a machine.
yeah.
No, it
I know
can't.
it can't.
It
Yeah, no.
actually cannot, right?
Yeah,
And even beyond that, like the logistics of fabrics and actually like acquiring fabrics from, if something that's like livestock, or if it's actual leather, like these processes have remained relatively similar over the past 200 years. There have been advancements, of course, but like it's the removal of the process for most Americans. And because in the past most people had to, if you needed clothes, you had to either sew it, you had someone in your family like a mother or grandmother who would sew it or make it themselves, right? Or you would have people around in a community who were tailors, and you would visit them quite often, where nowadays you can go and buy something for $3 at H&M,
yeah,
right? And it totally changes the your perspective and point of view on what the value of clothing is. um
absolutely.
and
100%.
it's just, I think people who listen to this podcast understand it, but I think at the same time, like we all need that reminder that, like you said, it's unquantifiable at times
Yeah,
what goes into making something, and that goes into making something so special like what you guys
yeah.
carry.
Well,
Let's talk
absolutely.
about the
Couldn't
shop.
agree.
Let's talk about the shop, man.
Yes.
Let's get into to the nitty gritty of the shop. Like we've talked everything around the shop. Um, what kind of brands do you guys carry at the shop? Maybe give a bit more specific examples of some brands that maybe you're a fan of and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so again, like the brands that we carry are rooted in an idea of making clothes in the right way, like ethically sourcing and ethically producing and all that good stuff. Um, Again, some do really, really direct reproductions, like stitch for stitch, like brands like the Real McCoys that do like stitch for stitch reproductions of like military wear, sportswear, workwear,
Mm.
like some of the most exacting clothing you will ever see in your entire life is produced by the Real McCoys. Um, and then we have other brands that do are more like interpretive and more contemporary in their approach, or either using heritage fabrics and turn them into something contemporary, or heritage details and turning in something more modern. Brands like Matthias, who's has a really small atelier in LA that he works in, where he's cutting and sewing everything. He does really, really interesting avant-garde. We like to call it avant-garde workwear. Very forward-thinking approach to what he does, but he does a lot of really beefy heritage. Uses a lot of really beefy heritage fabrics.
Yeah.
Um, I'm one of my favorite, probably my favorite brand that we carry is I'm wearing a jacket now. It's by Motive Manufacturing. Um, they're one of the brands that like take really traditional ideas and make them give them a more sort of contemporary and forward thinking um, give them a more contemporary and forward thinking eye and style,
Yeah.
and their entire collection really spans the gamut. There's a real like musicality to what they do, and what I mean by that is they have pieces from like really fine tailoring to really technical tech wear, almost like Dune-esque clothing. And then like
Totally.
they'll also do like the most elegant suit that you would ever see in your entire life. Daniel, the designer, is a third generation tailor. Um,
Mm,
and also one of the nicest people I've ever met in my life. Him and Samuel, the two people that run it, are like the most nice, humble people I've ever met in my entire life. And they basically, for lack of a better term, built a retail and clothing empire in Beijing. It's like kind of fascinating how they've like built it. It's really they're but also like two of the most humble people in the world. But they take all of these different disparate ideas and references and they all make them all sing really harmoniously throughout a collection. And
yeah.
it's kind of beautiful and it's just really tasteful the way they do it because it all somehow makes sense together, even though there are these like really disparate ideas. Um, yeah, I love Motive to death.
Yeah.
Everyone here, anyone who knows me knows I never shut up about Motive.
I when I first came into the shop, guys, I like Motive was I think you had the like the Bertolt leather jacket on. I
Oh
think the
yes,
day
yeah, yeah,
I think that was the day I came in and first came into the shop and met you. And this jacket, guys, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. And this is like
it's
I
gorgeous.
walked in, I was like when I say I needed to step up my style, like I feel like I think I was wearing like a Samuel Zelig like crew neck or something like that. And like
Oh, we love Samuel
I
Zelig.
know you guys carry SZ, love SZ.
We
And I'm
love
not
them.
saying it's bad by any means, but like I was just like, this is fire. I don't know. It was just very, very cool. Very, very cool style. Motive
Yeah,
is one of those great brands that you guys carry for sure.
I have worn that jacket and beat it to hell, and I need to take some because we have some flat lays of it when it's brand new, but I would like to get some pictures of it now that I've worn it for so long as it's patinaed and aged and just like track it, you know. Again, that's like the beautiful thing about the garments that we carry. It's like
Yeah,
they live a life with you and they grow with you and like they change with you, you know.
totally. Totally, totally, totally. I at some point I want to maybe pick up that jacket. That jacket is just beautiful. And like you said, um and for me, like I would say like you're spot on. I think the brands at Standard and Strange, like clothing that's made well, made correctly is something that also stands out from a point of view of like where the space is coming from. Um
Yeah.
and it's cool to like also it feels like you guys are also kind of exploring and always like on the hunt for designers and artists and creatives who are pushing the boundary. It seems like you're always
Yeah.
kind of like, okay, if there's a opportunity to bring on a new brand, it seems like you're kind of always on that hunt. Is that true or
Yeah, I mean, I would say that. So, firstly, bringing on a new brand is definitely a massive undertaking, and it's an investment in the relationship and an investment in the brand. So, it's definitely very important for us to make sure that we feel as though that the brand itself aligns with our ethos And it's also good if we can have some face-to-face time with people that run the brand.
Yeah.
Because to us, it's about building a relationship. It's not just about buying and selling merchandise, you know? It's like we want to invest in them as much as we want them to invest in us. Um, so that's super, super important. And also it's very important to me to make sure that if we are bringing on a new brand, that it is pushing our assortment forward. It is bringing something new to our assortment. We're bringing something new to market that will diversify our existing brand catalog. We
Yeah.
have a lot of brands. We have a lot of brands. So it's very important. We're very diligent in our approach to sourcing new vendors.
Have you ever been out to the shops in New Mexico and in California or not?
I have yet to go to the other two shops, but I hope to in the very, very near future. I've never been to New Mexico and I've been to California, but I've never been to the Bay Area.
Yeah.
So I would love to get out there at some point in the very near future. I also haven't met, we communicate with the other teams day-to-day basis through Slack.
Yeah.
But there's so many of them who I haven't met in person, and it just feels, I wouldn't say weird's the right word, but I just want to meet them in person. So
Yeah,
hopefully soon.
I think that would be a good idea because I was the reason why I asked because I wonder, and you can probably still tell me this, but it's the same. Every store carries the same brands, or is it built out differently based on location a little bit, or
So there's a handful of overlap between us and Berkeley from a brand perspective. There's a handful of brands that we have just in New York, like Nigel Caborn and Attractions, um, and Visvim.
mm,
Um, and there's also certain things that like the buyer over in Berkeley might advocate for that I don't necessarily think is right for the New York market and vice
yeah,
versa. So there is a little bit of play from an assortment standpoint from New York to Berkeley. And Santa Fe is like its own thing. We like to call it like the weird uncle. Um, yeah, the market there is really, really interesting and like really smart. It's very textile driven city.
yeah.
So Santa Fe is kind of like its own thing.
That's fun.
Um,
I think I would like for me, I want to visit the Santa Fe store the most, obviously after having been to the one
yeah,
in New York, just because Santa Fe is a place like it feels like crazy to me that a store like Standard and Strange is there, but I know that there, like you said, there's a rich history in textiles,
yeah,
and I don't know. I've talked to some friends who live in New Mexico, and like they love the fact like they love the store there. They love it.
yeah,
So it's just one of those like odd kind of places because most people when you think of fashion, you don't think of New Mexico, but
yeah,
there's definitely something there, something
yeah.
brewing.
Yeah, it's a really interesting, it's a very small city too. So it's like
Mm,
very close and condensed. But yeah, it definitely feels like something's happening there for sure.
yeah. Um, Now this might be like a little bit of a tougher question because um we all like to think of ourselves as, you know, special, unique. And I know Standard and Strange definitely thinks that, and I believe it is. But for people who are listening to this and maybe they're a bit more adept at, understanding the landscape of multi-brand retailers in New York City and
Mm.
in the country, what do
Mhm.
you think separates Standard and Strange from other multi-brand sellers in New York City?
Well, again, I think it's very important for us to carry a wide variety of garments here at Standard and Strange. Like you can get your best basic here. Like you can get your best t-shirt, you can get your best five pocket jean, you can get the best engineer boot in the world. Like you can get it here at Standard and Strange.
Mm,
But you can also get the best high concept version of whatever thing. Like you can get the best like Motive does an incredible bomber jacket with that we just
mm,
did in like this bright orange wax cotton fabric from Hallie Stevenson. You can get your best conceptual forward thinking fashion piece here too. That's really our glue. That's really what like holds us together is like you can get the best of everything here at Standard and Strange. I really do believe that. I genuinely believe that we have the best assortment in New York City. And I also think beyond that, just from a space standpoint, we have an incredibly knowledgeable staff. Like
Yeah.
everyone that works here in the New York store has been working in the retail market in New York for a very, very long time. Uh, they know the product here inside out. Uh, they know the brands inside out, their ethos is what they do.
Yeah.
We all have our own individual styles, so we can articulate things for people in different ways, which I think is super, super important. I hate going into places and everyone like looks the same, particularly if they look like the mannequins in
Yeah.
store.
Yeah.
Um, Again, like I think it's a diversity in product, it's a diversity in staff, and yeah, I think that's really what sets us apart.
I love it. And I agree. I mean, the coolest thing that I've observed like being in Standard and Strange is, I mean, we're kind of reiterating ourselves, but like I think like you said, the fact that everyone who works there, some of the coolest, not only just cool people, but just
No, thanks.
like just cool style. Like honestly, you could walk into Standard and Strange every day. And, I know you guys are avid outfit repeaters and garment repeaters, but like the way you
Yes.
style them, like you could do a little like short study on that and like literally like improve your style in that way. And
Yeah.
I've been doing that just from frequenting the shop myself. It's really powerful what you guys have built from a visual, from a styling standpoint too, from an individual standpoint.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's super important to me. It's people need to, especially if it's like the high concept stuff, right? Like people need to understand how to contextualize that within their own wardrobe and how to style it. It's
Good
That's
point.
super important from a service perspective.
Yeah.
Because like you can have all the hot shit that you want, but like if nobody knows how, like nobody understands its purpose, then what's the point?
Totally. Totally, totally, totally. Kyle, man, this has been great. Done a fantastic job.
Oh, thanks,
I
man.
I we only have a couple more questions I'm gonna throw at you. One more that's shop related, and then like
Sure.
kind of just getting into like the nothings of just conversation.
Totally.
But I want to ask you like finally for the shop, like is there anything you guys are striving for at the moment? Obviously you're one of the main figureheads at Standard and Strange in New York City, and you play
Hmm.
a big role, and it seems like and I know you do, you have a pulse on the direction of the shop. Like, give us a little bit of insight about like the goals and some of the things you're looking forward to.
So from a personal perspective, I definitely see myself my role expanding and within Standard and Strange. Like I have long-term goals of like co-designing capsule collections with certain vendors and opening
Oh,
new vendor
wow.
accounts. Those are real, like that is like I really like I'm like driven to like get that done.
Ooh, that's
Um,
that's really
so
fun.
that's like long and maybe short term. I have a couple, I don't want to talk about it, but there's a couple, we're gonna have some new stuff in the fall that I'm really, really excited about, and I don't want to put it out in the atmosphere yet.
We're not spilling the tea,
I just want
okay?
to, I just want it to sit when it happens and it happens.
Yes.
So those are more like short term and long term goals, like having like building out a large scale. Honestly, I'm gonna say this on camera, like building out like a large scale capsule collection with motive, particularly, is a big dream of mine, and I will make that
Buddy.
happen at some point. Um, but as far as the shop goes, I really, again, like I really, really believe in our assortment and like becoming the buyer for New York. I've gotten to get to know some of the people that run the brands that we work with, like Mia at 1111, like Lauren Yates at Women's Wear, like
Mm,
Samuel and Daniel at Motive, like Matt Indian Ash, Lily at Blue Maid. Like I've gotten to interact with these people inside and outside of work. And on top of like being like wildly creative and artistic, they're just like the nicest, most genuine people. And I think I don't. Maybe it's because I feel like Standard and Strange kind of attracts these people, and they're just like beautiful and genuine. So I just like my goal with the store is like I just want to make Standard and Strange the first name on everybody's lips from a retail perspective when they land in New York City. What are the shops I need to go to? I want Standard and Strange New York to be
Yeah.
the number one name on that list, and not like in like a shallow, like TikToky spammy way, like in like an actual real tangible way, because I believe so deeply and so passionately about what we do and the people that we work with.
Beautiful, man.
Oh,
Absolutely beautiful. And I think
thanks.
that I think that you guys are well on your way in continuously doing that.
Thank you.
The event that you held literally last night, which highlighted two different vintage sellers, right? One
Yeah, yeah,
from
yeah.
Are they both from California or just one was from California?
So Steven at Ever Ready Vintage is based in California, and then Manny at the Goodie Vault is based in Chicago.
Chicago.
Yeah,
Like things like that. And I know you guys have more and more on the way. And there's a
yeah.
lot of competition, obviously. This is like New York City. It's no joke. It's if you can make
It's
it here, you can make it anywhere.
it's
That's
true.
the slogan is very true.
Yep.
But I hope to also project the message that you're trying to put out, which is I think super important for the fashion industry right now. It's also a
Yep.
message of like slowing down a little bit, right?
Yep.
Like I think, after the pandemic and because of TikTok and short form video, like the world felt like it was speeding up and slowing down all at the same time in a weird way from a
Yep.
standpoint of especially in fashion. And
Yep.
to know that there are really good people who are making the clothes that populate the shelves at Standard and Strange is powerful. And I'm happy that I tapped in with you guys because I feel like it's going to be a fun ride for the next however many years, hopefully forever.
Yes.
Hopefully
Yeah. Hopefully forever.
when it's Neo New York.
That's the goal. That's the goal, is forever for sure.
Yeah. I wanted to kind of throw some random questions at you just to get in your head a little bit because I feel like you're the type of guy, Kyle, where you have opinions. You have thoughts.
Oh, yes.
Whenever I come to the shop, you're always saying you're
I'm running
always
my
you and
mouth.
Sam are always yakking at each other.
Oh, I
But
love him.
I
I love you,
Sam,
Sam.
yeah, Sam, we need to talk later. But um how do you stay like it's hot in New York City right now. It's a sauna outside.
Yes.
How are you dressing in the way that you're dressing and it being so hot?
Um, you remain hot. You go through it. You grin and you bear it. No, kidding. I mean, I think people always say wear like lighter weight fabrics in spring, summer. And that is very true, but I think it's also very important to like pay attention to like how something is woven, and like avoiding like densely woven fabrics, and like going towards more like open weaves, low tension knits.
Hmm.
Um, like loop wheel, for example. My boss in Berkeley, Jeremy, likes to call loop wheel like a living fabric, and it's very true because it's vertically woven. It's so like it moves with you. It's so fun and it's so airy. It like really it really changes with you as you wear it. So I'd say not just lightweight fabrics, open weaves, and low tension knits.
Love it. I might actually use this for I'm making a YouTube video about this actually for this
Yes,
week. And so I might
yeah,
actually use this clip literally that we just did because um
use it.
I think the common trope is, and I talk about this in the video, is like you wear lighter materials, certain materials, linens, chambres,
Yeah,
breathable materials, and then you wear colors that also kind of aid in light refraction as opposed to light
yeah,
absorption, and that
yeah,
helps as well. But like in New York, like right now, it's actually I haven't been outside, but I know it's like raining where I am,
yeah.
in the city, and I could
It's
just tell
humid.
it's muggy, it's humid,
Yeah,
it's muggy.
it's gross.
Um, but it just seems like you just get through it. Like you obviously like you know that you're gonna be sweaty at some point, but you might as well look fly and sweaty.
You gotta look fine. I mean,
Yeah,
thankfully we got some good AC at the shop, and hopefully,
true.
spend as much time indoors too, I would say,
Yeah,
is a good thing. Definitely
yeah.
be in AC as much as possible.
For where you guys are at in the shop, just from a standpoint of like good eats, in the area. What are you doing for like lunch? I know you're always, I feel like every time not every time, but last time I caught you, I was at Blackstock and Weber. I was at 242 and I came around in the shop and you were like eating like a burger or something like that. Was it 7th Street or what were you eating?
Shouts to Seventh Street. Seventh Street. I love Seventh Street. They opened one up a couple doors down.
Yep.
Maybe I this was probably like maybe 2 months ago. At this, no, maybe less. I don't know. But yeah, shout out to Seventh Street. Seventh Street is top notch.
Yep.
So that's a good spot for sure. Parisi Deli is great. They
Parisi
have a
Deli.
uh they have a chicken cutlet sandwich called the Dennis, which is very, very good. Uh and then Los Tacos Numero Uno is also a very good option.
Yep.
Uh if you want. So that sort of spans the gamut. You get like deli sandwich, burger, tacos. There's some good food around here though, for sure.
Fire. I love those tacos. I
Yeah,
always I always do the quesadillas actually. I do like one quesadilla, one taco, carne asada.
nice. Two adobada tacos. That's what I get.
Whoa, you said that like you know a little bit of Espanol.
Not in I mean I know a little bit, just here and there being from New York, but that's yeah, not fluent unfortunately.
Love it. Kyle, is there anything else that you want the world to know about Standard and Strange or yourself that maybe they wouldn't have previously known if they hadn't tuned into this episode?
That's a really great question. Um I mean, as far as the store goes, I think the beauty now of having a store in New York City is like again to like go back to myself 10, 12 years ago. I had no access to these clothes whatsoever. Like my access to these clothes were like forums and magazines. And to have a store like us in New York City where you can come and you can have like that tactile experience with these clothes that like some of like what we carry is some of the most rare brands in the world and we're the only place you're going to get it.
Mm,
Um so to have an outpost, have a retail space in New York City is truly a blessing for me, and I still get goosebumps about the fact that I get to do this for a living and work here. Um, but yeah, I think just come in and experience these clothes. Like I love these clothes so much. I just want the world to also experience these clothes and love these clothes as much as I do.
Kyle Foxworth, ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much, Kyle. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. I appreciate your time, man. This was a blast. It was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.